Welcome to Toot Your Own Horn, Music Matters. Today I am with the one and only Jim Logan. Hi, Jim.
Hello, Lisa.
I don't know how many decades we've known each other, but I couldn't think of someone better to participate on this podcast.
Well, thank you so much. And I know it goes way back. Oh, we're talking 80s, mid 1980s. If we're not at 30 years, pretty darn close.
For sure. I would
Yeah.
love for you to tell our audience how you chose your instrument.
When I start to tell my story, I start to feel immediately self-conscious until I start to think about all the people that helped me. I was in a private school in fifth grade. It was band night. You showed up at the gymnasium and they laid out all of the instruments. And I went to band night determined to play the saxophone. I just thought the saxophone was just the bomb. And I tried trumpet and trombone and the buzzing of the lips and flute. What is that? And and then they pulled out the saxophone, and it was probably one of the most expensive instruments in the shop. Loved it, but the price tag was well over $1,000, and that was immediately not going to happen. I have five brothers and sisters, middle class home. My dad was an insurance agent. My mom was a bank teller. There was no way I wouldn't even consider asking. So they handed me a clarinet, and I looked at the price tag. It was $125. It was a plastic Artley clarinet. And I thought, my mom and dad were real big fans of the Lawrence Welk show. We always had Lawrence Welk on Saturday nights. And Henry Cuesta, I just thought, man, that guy, he had it going on. And so I thought, you know what, this would be pretty cool. So that's how I ended up with the clarinet. Now, for 2 years of band, I didn't really have band. I had 30-minute lessons once a week. My private school did not have a band. In fact, my private lessons, and this is how it starts for me right from the beginning, I have somebody looking out for me. My private lessons weren't private lessons. It was me with another clarinetist named Julie. I somehow took to it pretty quickly, and she was maybe not as into it. And Marlon Ridout, I will never forget, Marlon Ridout said, you know what, I've got to spend one-on-one time with you. He had no time. So he gave up his lunchtime. Okay. So he would sit there and munch on his sandwich so that I would have my time with him. And prior to this, I should back this up. The reason I even went to band night, none of my family at this point, I'm the fifth of six kids. So my younger brother ended up playing trumpet, but at this point, nobody in my family had played in band. But the reason I was at band night was because I had shown some interest on the upright piano that sat in the front porch of our house. Now, I'm from Iowa. The front porch of our house had no heat, and my sisters, older sisters, were taking piano lessons. They kind of enjoyed it. My sister Jane actually gave me my first lessons, was showing me, notes on the keyboard and this. And so I had kind of plunked around, but I still have visions of them out there in ski caps and gloves on that piano. And I mean, it's in hindsight, but that's how I ended up at band night. And so I started playing clarinet for 2 years with Mr. Ridout, and then Anson Junior High in Marshalltown, seventh grade was a mind-blowing experience because I heard a band for the first time. Sitting in a band with Norm Egley, great trumpet player. He's still with us, and just a super guy. And we were about 6 months into my seventh grade year. It was an all hands call for oboes. We need oboes, and I said, well, yeah, well, maybe no, not you, not you. Uh, and so he was watching for me. I still kind of wanted to do the saxophone thing. We didn't have jazz band, then we had stage band. So in eighth grade, we were able to get a much cheaper saxophone than the one I looked at band night. And so I started playing saxophone. Went all the way through high school. Jerry Ellingson was my band director. Great band program at Marshalltown. And then we moved. We moved to a little farm town called Van Horn, and I ended up spending 2 years in high school at Benton Community High School in Van Horn, which is a real shock to my system coming from the big city of Marshalltown, 25,000, to Van Horn, population 600. But again, I had band directors looking out for me. Steve Ness, who's no longer with us, and Carol Trudeau, who's the vocal teacher there. They saw that I was going to go into music, and they would meet with me regularly to give me theory classes. There was no such thing as music theory in those, but they again gave me a lot of extra time, which I'll always be thankful for. The whole pay it forward thing is a very, very, very deep need for me to give thanks to all of these people. While I was in Marshalltown, I was taking lessons with a guy named John Flora, who was a major influence in my life. Again, no longer with us, but John really would spend a lot of time with me. I was taking clarinet lessons, I was taking saxophone lessons, and when I got to the eighth grade, and I remember the moment, I was standing out in front of my house, and my I had an older brother and sister who were really going through it in terms of what am I going to do with my life. They were in community college. I don't know what I want to do. I'm not sure what they're going to do. And I was like, I'm just going to decide today what I'm going to do with my life, because then when I'm their age, I won't go through all that stress. So I looked around. I'm like, well, what do I like? Well, I like history, but I really don't like school, which is ironic because I'm a college professor now. Well, I'm kind of good at clarinet and saxophone. I'm just going to do that for a living. And that's when I decided that day in front of my house in Marshalltown, eighth grade, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. And I always worked towards the performance aspect of it, and teaching kind of came along with it, and was a key factor in my development. But yeah, then from there, I went to North Texas. I was with Jim Gillespie, who was a wonderful teacher for me, wonderful, just had the sweetest sound and was all about musicality. And I just remember running through those rose etudes with him, and I would get so angry because he would say, he'd have this, how about a little trying to little crescendo here, or how about this little here, and I'd be like, why didn't I think of that? And one day, and especially, I remember he said, "Look, he didn't say lighten up. He didn't really talk like that, but he basically was saying, lighten up. You're good. You just haven't done enough of them. Give it some time." And
Yeah.
and um and I did. I was there. Now I'm going to date myself. I was there from 83 to 88, and those are the very early days of the clarinetist, the journal.
Mhm.
And I remember, spending a fair amount of time with John Scott too, and I would hear these conversations about, the next convention, and we're going to do this, and it's very interesting looking back in the history, and seeing all of those names, and I heard all those names, the Chuck Wests and the Betty Bly's, and
Right.
I mean, it's just kind of neat that to think, wow, I was back there way back then. They were talking about Denver. Is it going to stay in Denver? What are we going to do? From North Texas, I really didn't know what to do. I had a performance degree because I couldn't be a band director. I knew I have there's just no way I could have done it. I don't have that kind of patience. And so I went down to the Houston area, and I studied with Jeff Lerner for a year. He was at University of Houston. Jeff is an odd student, and boy, he really ran me through the paces in terms of orchestral excerpts and everything, and that was great. And I was just teaching lessons down in the Lake Jackson area. Bob Ozell was a huge help to me. He helped get me set up with Jeff, and I was teaching literally at his Bob's old high school. I was teaching lessons and just making ends meet. And then with Jeff's help, one day his phone rang, and it was Dick Waller. Dick was principal clarinetist at Cincinnati. At this time, he's former Navy band clarinetist, ironically, coming out of Korea, I guess. Anyway, out of the blue, Dick called Jeff, said, "Hey, I got a slot available for Aspen. You have anybody that could come out to Aspen?" And with like 10 days notice, I was in my car driving from Houston to Aspen. Had a tremendous summer there with him, and again, just so much help above and beyond. Same thing with Jeff Lerner.
Very accurate, very precise, really
Oh,
interesting guy, Jeff Lerner.
it was just the orchestral approach.
Hmm.
And as an undergrad, that was just not something we covered excerpts,
Hmm.
certainly in North Texas, but this was all excerpts all the time, and getting ready for that orchestral audition scene, which is, that's a different world. While I was at Aspen, I've heard of an opening in the Midland Odessa Symphony in West Texas. They had a double hiring situation going on between the school district and the symphony. So basically, I auditioned for both at the same time in Odessa. I played principal in that symphony, and then was teaching in 6 junior highs and 2 high schools there in Odessa. And then the second clarinetist was living in Midland, and covering all of the lessons there. So it was set up. It's that symphony is still going strong, playing in a beautiful concert hall now, which we didn't have. But that dual thing between the school district, and it was, unfortunately, has fallen by the wayside. But that's where I was, and then I was just taking auditions, and that's why I eventually heard about an audition again with Bob Ozell's help in Washington D.C. with the Navy band. And the great thing about being in Odessa at that time was Bob was the clarinet professor at Texas Tech, so
Right.
I was running up to Lubbock, not every week, but often, many times. Boy, Bob really put me through the paces, and was a tremendous help. and helping me land the job in Washington, D.C.
And how
So
long were you in the band?
can't believe I'm saying it. 26 years. It just seems like I just can't believe that's true. But and I've been out now going on 8 years.
That's hard to believe too.
Yeah, I mean, and I knew I was gonna love being in the band because I love history and being in Washington D.C. I witnessed so much of it. I marched in 7 inaugurals. I was in 7 inaugural balls. I spent significant time in the White House and the Pentagon and just witnessed history. The dedication of the World War II Memorial, the FDR Memorial, the Korean War Memorial. It was the presidential funerals, President Reagan, President Ford funerals. Just being an eyewitness to all of that was really amazing. And then in addition to that we did the touring. I've been in all 50 states. Not all of those were on tour with the Navy band, but 46 of them easily were. And so you saw a lot of the country and just met a lot of people and it was very humbling to be a part of that band. We started this thing called the meet and greet. When I got in the band, it had kind of had started. There had been a nudge, and basically it's what it is. It's you're out in front of the hall, 45 minutes in front of the concert, and you're out there immediately after the concert for another 20 minutes or so, and somebody else in the band, I can't remember who, it suggested I help with that. And boy, it was just something that I cherish now when I look back on it. I mean, literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people that I've greeted over the years, and they were always so happy to see that Navy uniform. That was the beauty of these tours. We would go into parts of the country that just didn't see a Navy uniform, but there were all kinds of family members that had been in the Navy, that were in the Navy, and I mean, people would be emotional sometimes. It would be overwhelming. I mean, literally, we people in tears. I'm a fragile flower. These guys would shake my hand until it was like, gonna bust. I had to figure out a way to protect myself. Honestly, I'm no joke. I mean,
Right.
um,
Because they were so
so
enthusiastic about wanting to
they,
greet
they
you. And
they they were, and they were just wonderful, and they would ask some interesting questions, and some of them would be fairly pointed questions, about why didn't you do this and why didn't you play that, and you just learned to, hey, this is the deal, and you would try to explain that there was always a reason, not the reason they wanted to hear maybe, and then if you just, I realized quickly, you just stand back and say, I appreciate that concern. I'll pass it on to the captain, and on we'd go. I tell the stories about, and I'm running off the trail here just a little bit, but you talk about how nice people could be on the road. I still remember we had a percussionist, Juan Vasquez. Juan was a foodie, and he would for weeks leading up to the tour, he would be researching like the best this and the best that in terms of restaurants and everything. And we were in the middle of Kansas somewhere, and I remember it was a Sunday afternoon. We had a matinee. It was going to be a treat. We got to eat dinner at dinner time on Sundays because of the matinees. And he'd been talking about this barbecue joint. Get to the hotel, and he goes excitedly to the front desk after the concert. Hey, is this place open? Blah blah. Oh, yes, it is. It's just a few miles down the road. And Juan's like, well, that's fine. Could you just call a taxi for me? And they looked at him and they said, we don't have taxis here. And Juan's like, oh. And the person behind the desk said, well, here, just take my car. This
seriously?
kind of stuff happened. I was part of a group that would really want to get to the gym as much as possible. It was the only way it helped us keep our sanity from long weeks on the road and
Right.
concerts literally every day. And same thing, we got up in the morning. We knew there was a gym a few miles down the road, and hey, could we get a taxi? This is a different time, different year, I'm sure. And the woman behind the front desk said, oh, I'm so sorry, we don't have taxis, but just a minute. She picks up her phone. She says, sweetheart, could you come down here? These nice gentlemen want to go to the gym. She called her 19-year-old daughter to take 3 guys to the gym. And the daughter dropped us off at the gym and said, what time would you like me to come back to pick you up? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And it was just so wonderful to see that part of the country.
So
And
what is the power of military bands? You're speaking to the country's love of music and to the love and respect for music in military style, delivered through a military band.
Well, I will tell you something, and I always joked about this in my entire career. I still do. Military and music a lot of times just do not go together, Lisa. You know this. I mean, anybody that has there is just no way that the two mix all the time, and they don't. And we were butting heads over all kinds of things, and I'll tell you the most frustrating parts of my career were when we had no control over what we were allowed to do, and we would just have to make it work. And the band had this most remarkable, I hope they still have it, sense of humor, just laughing all the time because we were in absolutely ridiculous situations. And there are about 100 that come to mind that I won't bore your folks with. But one thing that the Navy band did right from my very first day, and this had been going on for a while, and it was brilliant. They programmed or tried to program for everybody in the audience. What does that mean? Well, we would start with a march, generally. At the end, we would play the Armed Forces medley. So everybody who had a relative, and so we covered the patriotic stuff. We might do a patriotic thing in the middle, but then we would play a concert overture. We would have a vocalist singing pop or opera. Our concerts really were diverse. And this is the kind of thing, I mean, I think more and more ensembles uh, are moving to this. And this meet and greet thing that I'm talking about, and having a narrator talk between the pieces, explaining and making a connection with the audience, and the highbrows, the attitudes that somehow thought this is beneath us, just shut up and listen to our music. That was not ever part of what we did. And I witnessed the power of that to the point where my students here at UTEP could tell you stories, but I make them, introduce their music. We
Yeah.
take the time to introduce music. And the first step was just getting them in front of a microphone and saying, "My name is Jim Logan, and today I'm going to be playing the first movement of Mozart's Clarinet Concerto. Thank you." That's step one. And then the next thing is to add a few lines into that. With junior and senior recitals, it was pick one tune that you're going to introduce, and it didn't really go so well. So I said, that's it. I can't take it anymore. You guys are going to introduce everything, every piece, everything, every time you're walking on stage. You're going to manage that, and that goes back to 1992 when I was first in the Navy band, because that connection and inserting a little humor here and there and some seriousness, that had a profound impact. They were so far ahead than a lot of the concert culture elsewhere.
And I was a college student and I was in that same position playing in small ensembles when we were doing almost a very similar thing with our concerts, speaking. I found it was a profound issue for me to speak after I played.
You a nerves issue or
No, it was a brain issue, meaning the tools I used to play the clarinet were not the same tools I
well,
used
that's
to
funny.
speak. And I
That's
literally found
very interesting.
myself tongue-tied and found it very difficult to speak. It wasn't that I was unwilling, and I wondered if you have experienced any of that with your students, that literally I couldn't get words out of my mouth.
That's fascinating to hear. I haven't thought of it that way, and I'm going to share that with my students. But the one thing I harp on is we practice like we're going to perform. So that means if I have a recital, and I do this to this day, if I have a recital coming up, I have my music set up on the stand. I go on the other side of the studio, and I'm thinking about, okay, I'm not in my studio. I'm on stage, and I'm walking through and smiling, and I'm bowing, I'm knowledge, I'm whatever. Now it's the first tune, and I'm listening. I'm counting every rest
Mhm.
all the way. Okay, now that piece is done. I'm leaving stage, or if I'm not leaving stage, what have you, the bow and the intro. I practice that everything from the very, and I'm not
Wow.
skipping rests. It's time consuming, but I found this is a focus issue for
Yes.
me, that my focus, and I joke with my students all the time. I don't know how this happened. Chocolate milkshakes are my thing. I find myself wandering and thinking about chocolate milkshakes at the stupidest time, or what have you. They're distractions. So we practice being distracted. We practice recital. We practice what we're going to say. And it's not. Mozart was born on this day and he died unfortunately. You know, it's got to be no notes. It's just off, and you practice what you're going to say, just like you practice being in tune, you practice your runs. And the more you do that, the easier it gets. Everybody has their strengths and everybody has their weaknesses. And this comes easier to talkers such as me. I come from a long line of talkers. So this comes somewhat, this was not one of my struggles. But my whole thing with the introductions and talking between pieces is you're trying to get the crowd on your side a little bit and just trying to get you to relax and make that connection. And if you can't, if you're too scared to look into the audience eyes, then you just, you're looking over their head. When I was at Catholic University, I got to DC in '92, and it took me 6 whole years to get to start my graduate work. I did my master's and doctorate at Catholic University of America. I got to spend 6 wonderful years with Ricardo Morales, which is just
Wow.
unbelievable. But I won the concerto competition, and I was playing the Copland clarinet concerto with the orchestra. And we were in just a big box room.
Mhm.
And you talk about distractions and practicing being distracted and all of this. This is the night I learned that I had never practiced with my eyes closed. And the reason this became a big issue was because there was a woman sitting about 3 steps, maybe 4 steps in front of me, and she had her legs crossed and she had sandals on, and she started beating in time, and she had forest green toenail polish
Oh, no.
that just drove me crazy, and right in front of me. And I thought, okay, no problem. I'll just look over here, but I could still see. And okay, I'll look over here. I still see. No problem. I'll just close my eyes. I thought, dear God, I've never practiced with my eyes closed. So that was just another way to learn. Okay, you gotta suck it up and figure that out.
Thing about speaking to audiences is that we tend to wear uniforms, whether it be through military or through our own
Mhm.
concert uniform, which is black.
Mhm.
And the audience learns through their senses, which is both visual and auditory. And 60% of the population are visual learners. And so if you don't speak to your audience and make a connection to them, you're potentially wiping out the main way that they start to get feedback and develop interest.
Yes. Yes. Gosh, that is so well said. That is so well said. And you can go out. I've always been one that's really big on just going out and smiling to the audience, but just having 20 seconds, it doesn't take that much time. Just 20 seconds to just smile and have an aw shucks kind of moment with the crowd. I think it's just so important. And it's, as musicians, it's something we need to be doing more and more and more and more. And I think most people are getting the memo on that. I really do. I'm going to be at Fort Worth this summer playing. And I will certainly be doing that. We have a very tight window, but I'm still going to. And I played with the Navy Band Clarinet Quartet, and we would go out on our own, and we would always do that. It was such an integral part. It was just kind of drilled into me. Now I can't imagine just going out and sitting down and playing. I can't imagine.
For sure. If somebody
So
was listening to this podcast and really fascinated by your story, what would you tell them to choose to play a wind instrument right now?
it's so rewarding. In my circumstance, you start going back to eighth grade when I decided, okay, I'm going to do this for a living. It was all about concern over making a living, and so that's a different avenue. I have students that are minors. They're going to be doctors. They're scientists, and they're very much into researching and having their own chamber series is one of the many ways we look at that. But there are so many great things that come from young people's that are studying music. All of the tests and the results that show what a great culture that band culture is. So if we're talking about a young person, it's how wonderful those band kids are, and to have that direction, and to have that, to learn the sense of being on time and working with others. And I mean, you can't put words to that, how important that is. If you're talking about somebody who's my age, I have a story actually of another guy that inspired me. His name was Jack Slagle, and he was a student of mine. After I got into DC, I had time. I started teaching some lessons in a music and art store, which was way out in Bowie, and I was living in, I think, in Capitol Hill or something. Jack was retired, gentleman who came to me and he said, "Hey, Jim." This is all how he talked, kind of like Yogi Bear. "Hey, Jim." And he had retired from, and his entire career, Lisa, was he worked two full-time jobs his whole life. He was a fireman and he was a repairman, a fix-it guy at the Coke plant. He raised six kids and put them all through private school. His wife never worked a day. He worked 80 hours a week. He got into his 60s, retired, and he's decided, hey, I'm going to pick up the clarinet again. And he was so busy playing in the community band and playing in a community college band. He would show me his calendar, and I would be just like, this is incredible. And so from a health standpoint for him, he went to the doctor about 6 months, 8 months after we'd been taking lessons, and he came very proudly next week to tell me that the doctor sat him down and looked at him after all the tests had been run and looked at him and said, "Okay, what's going on with you?" Jack's like, "What? What?" He said, "Everything's better. Lungs, breathing, blood pressure." I mean, the doctor was just like, "All right, you've got to tell me." And
It was the
that was
clarinet.
it totally was. I mean, he attributed it completely to that, to the point where after a couple of months, I was done with music and art scene. I just was going to teach out of my house or nothing. And he said, "Hey, can I come and study with you?" I'm like, he lived in Annapolis. He was driving an hour one way, in that horrible traffic to get to me. And he did that for years. Such an inspiration to me. And what that did for him, he had played in college, but he had he gigged in college, saxophone, clarinet, some, and he had set it down. His whole, he raised up this family and he's retired. And so the reward of what it means to perform with others, to learn the history of some of these composers, to be on the cutting edge of new works. It's difficult for me to even articulate how important that is, how much that means to me, and how much it's meant to my life to have this as my life. One thing I'll pass on, and you probably know this, but the U.S. military is the largest employer of musicians in the country. And there's a lot of people in those bands, there are a lot of great people. Military and music are not for everybody. It worked wonders for me, but yeah, it was a great treat for me.
We need to keep the military bands around. They change lives and inspire people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Agreed.